Hello, Be Awesome listeners. This is episode 76 of the Be Awesome podcast, and this, I think, is going to be yet another awesome podcast. I always like to open up before I introduce the guest as often as possible to show the relationship importance, as well as your word, as well as the people around you, the importance of the 5 people that you spend the most time with. That's the average of who you are. And this is a real interesting one because I've never met this guest in person. I've actually only talked to him for about 5 minutes on the phone. We chatted back and forth via LinkedIn Messenger, and I've seen him here for the first time on video on this podcast. So how did this all happen? Well, on July 31st, Friday morning, I get an email from Limo J. And Limo J just says, Josh, hope that you and the family are doing well. I've attached a link to a close friend site. Thought it may be of interest to you and possible podcast show guest with www.ericchasen.com, who that's our guest today. Limo J. So Limo J owns At Your Service Limousine. He started it in 1993. Entrepreneur. He's been driving limos most of his professional career. It's actually his whole professional career. But when I got that, I said to Jay, I'd love to meet him, have him give me a call, because I've tried not to be pushy with getting guests on. And it was Friday. I did a quick scan, didn't really know too much about Eric. And on Sunday, for whatever reason, August 2nd, I got online. I started doing a little digging, and I'm like, wow, this guy's a pretty cool cat. I'm not going to wait for him to call me. So I reached out to him on Monday. We had that 5-minute conversation, and he ended with, I understand if you need to vet me out a little bit and do a little bit of research on me. And I said, nope. You came from Limo J, and that's good enough for me. And I don't know that he understands why I said that. I'm sure he understands why I said that, but he doesn't know the story behind it. In June of 1991, I was celebrating my 16th birthday. On my 16th birthday, my mom put me in our 1987 Subaru station wagon, 5-speed, 4-cylinder, 0 to 60 in 13 minutes, family cruiser, and drove me down to the Shaw's supermarket at 5 Corners in Easton, Massachusetts. She dropped me off, and she said, good luck. I walked in on my 16th birthday, and I applied for a job as a bagger, paying, I think, either $3.85 an hour or $4.15 an hour. I got the job. I went through training. I was a bagger. We don't see those very often anymore. Normally, we have the checker, and you have to bag yourself. But in the old days, in the early 90s, you actually used paper bags and plastic bags. You'd ask either one before every order, and you'd bag as fast as you could. And there were cashiers that tried to push product as fast as they could to you to backlog the belt to make you look bad at times. And on my very first day bagging, I had a gentleman just a little bit older than me by the name of Jay Carvalho. And my grandfather went through the line, one of the first customers, to get his break food. My grandfather was a custodian at the grocery store, and my grandmother worked in the bakery. And my grandfather handed me $2, and Jay looked at me, and I'll never forget, and he said, hey, how do you know that guy? And I said, oh, that's my grandfather. And he said, Manny? I love Manny. He's a great guy. And Nivalda, that's your grandmother, right? In the bakery. And he was so excited and happy that he knew my grandparents and how wonderful they were. And I spent most of my adolescent life thinking that nobody paid any attention to my grandparents because they were immigrants that spoke very little English. And were custodians and worked in bakeries and factories and such. And to this day, all the way going to yesterday, Jay has always, in every interaction, asked me how my grandmother and my mother are doing. He used to always ask me how my grandfather is doing. He's a person of incredible character. He is a person that I don't see very often, but I've known for a very long time. And he has the ability that if he says this is a good person, his word is good enough because of how good a person he is. So, Jay, I appreciate you putting that together. I appreciate you being such an amazing human all these years. As little as we interact, it's always a good one. And lining this podcast up. And if you want to go for a COVID cruise, call Limo J at Your Service Limousine. I'll put his information. I'm going to give him a free plug because he delivers an amazing service. The quick story, and then I'll get this there. I called Jay at 10 o'clock at night last February. I had a last-minute trip to Baton Rouge. I had a 5 a.m. departure, and it was going to be icy and snowy, and Uber wouldn't pick me up, drop me off. Completely just mind blown, forgot even like I was scrambling. And because I don't use local transportation very often, I use Uber outside of Boston. And I'm like, crap, what do I do? And I'm like, I'll call Limo J. And I call him up. I talked to him. He says, yeah, absolutely, I can do it. He was here early, picked me up, got me into Boston. Rain, snow, sleet, doesn't matter. Ice, he'll drive straight through it, and he does a fantastic job with it. No questions asked. He does an amazing service. So be sure to check him out. And so with that said, let's get to the guest. This guy, I got to tell you, we're gonna dig into some stuff that he is not prepared for. He is a resilience coach, and I've mentioned before. I get approached by coaches probably 2 to 3 times a week. Social media influencers. I get a lot of people telling me I could be doing things better. I should be editing my podcast. I should be, making this viral, doing whatever. I don't want to do any of that. I want to do what I want to do, and I'm doing it, and it's working, and it's because you guys love it, and I'm going to keep doing it. But he's a resilience coach. And so when I dug into him a little bit about being a coach, I realized that this guy's legit. Like he is overly qualified with it. He is the author of Despair to Millionaire. It's a book of his life, of his story, which is phenomenal. I hate to say it. Jay was upset about this one. I've got a copy of it, advance notice. These are my Post-it notes. Dave, if you listen to David Cook's Post-it note, if I put a lot of Post-it notes, that means I got a lot of nuggets of knowledge out of it. This thing is monstrous with nuggets of knowledge. And what's even better, for those of you that like Cliff Notes, at the end of the book, you got every chapter with some bullet points and some takeaways. So if you don't want to listen to Eric's story and you just want to get the bullet points on life, he's gone ahead and give you the Cliff Notes at the end of it. So it's worth the price of admission. Comes out August 25th. Eric Chasen lives next door to me in Mansfield, Massachusetts. Was one of the founders of Triton Technologies, which he sold to private equity successfully, and was able to retire at an early age. And he shares his story. We're going to talk a little bit about life. But Eric, welcome aboard, my friend. This isn't your first podcast because I've listened to like 20 of yours already. So you're out there. You're blasting these out like crazy.
Thank you very much, Josh. I'm still trying to do the math on how old I was in 1991. I think I got it.
Yeah, it's painful. It's painful. So I got to tell you, I think I'm gonna call this "Cut from the Same Cloth." This episode. I think you and I have a lot of similarities. One thing that I did find in reading your book, you were truly an overachiever in high school. You finished in just 4 years.
Okay.
Yeah. It took me 5.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So, and then you went to community college and you went for 2 and it didn't work out, right? And that was the only place it took you. I went to Massasoit Community College, 94 to 96. I had to test in. I was the only kid in the class. I was wondering where everybody else was to test in. They wanted to give me special class offerings, which meant I don't think they had classes low enough for me to fit into to figure out. And to this day, I'm still on double secret academic probation because I think my GPA is under a 1. But I only have a couple classes to finish. At some point, maybe this COVID thing, I'll try my hand at internet classes. But so let's talk about you a little bit. So school wasn't your bag. You've got this book, Despair to Millionaire. You've gone through. You went through growing up and having what. There was no such thing as ADD, and in your book you talk about some of the things that you have. We don't want to get into the details of all of that stuff, so people read the book. But you had some difficulties in grasping school and really making it work for you, which most people would think that's your nail in the coffin, right? You're not gonna amount to anything. You don't get to a nice college, you don't get to a nice school. What was that like for you?
Well, in thinking back, and as I allude to in my book, Josh, as I was learning about my son, I think this is chapter 4 on the intangibles, the attitude, dedication, commitment. Oftentimes, those intangibles, were all I really had to bring to the party. Because as you mentioned, I didn't have the formal education outside of high school. In some college, I check that box, which is some college, when I fill out applications, right? And thinking back, or when I really began to think back about it, is when my son started experiencing similar phenomenons in school as well, which is, up to a certain point, like around middle school, doing well, but then really kind of hit a wall around middle school. Never a behavior problem. I was never a behavior problem. He was never a behavior problem. But in terms of concentrating and focusing, scroll ahead a bunch of years, we were able to have him tested both in school and outside of school with a great neuropsychologist that determined that he has something called executive functioning deficit, which is basically planning, organizing, and as I again mentioned in my book, and as you mentioned here, Josh, it's basically when trying to prioritize or start a project, or where do I go from here, or I got these 5 things, what do I tackle first? It feels overwhelming, and it goes into other things like dissecting word problems. Not so much necessarily. I was pretty weak at math, weaker than my son. His was more around the word problems. Mine was just I never passed a math course farther than my freshman year of high school, freshman algebra. I did take geometry my sophomore year. I failed that. Summer school, I got an A because my mom said, you can't come home unless you pass this. I never passed another math course after early high school. And subsequent to seeing my son struggle academically, particularly around reading being like word problems and other type reading comprehension things, I had myself as well neuropsychologically tested and found out very similar things, which is that higher level type decision making, the executive functioning, and also low levels of ADD. Not so much the hyperactive part, more of like I think it's the distraction. There's another word for it. Begins with an I that I can't think of right this second, but yeah. I will. It's the not the hyperactive. There's 2 main types of ADD. One is the ADHD, and the other is inattentive. Is the word I was thinking of. Inattentive. Yeah. So that's. So in a nutshell, that's a big reason why 40 years ago I didn't know this, but because he's been able to get some help with supports and various things like that. We got him into a school in middle school that kind of specialized in that, and he excelled there and went on to excel in high school with different supports and tools. That's the benefit of knowledge and testing and things like that we didn't have back in the 80s and 90s.
So you just hit something that I wanted to kind of hit on this and get a little bit more into the. I was trying to get the unemployment numbers as of today. I know that the Massachusetts unemployment rates are about 17.4% right now. I know there's a lot of people that are worried about remote learning and going back to school. Every time I start a keynote, I talk about 1 in 3 people minimum in my audience are going through either death, divorce, disease, drugs, not divorce. It doesn't discriminate, and everybody's going to go through some level of that. Or is going through some level of that. I think with everything that's going on in the world today, I think almost all my listeners are going through something that would have the new D, which is your despair. And that feeling of despair comes in many ways. We'll get to some of your other ones. I know from my experience, I did take 5 years to graduate high school. I did only get into 1 community college and applied to a number of them. I know, and I can remember having such a feeling of just not being important, of someone that wasn't ever going to accomplish anything, that whatever job I got, I can remember I got a job driving rental cars. I think I was 20 or 21, driving rental cars from one place to the other. I made like $10 an hour, and I thought that was about as good as I was going to get. Even though I knew I had some skill sets and things, I wasn't doing what everybody else was doing. Do you remember going through that same, like, what did it feel like from you? Did you take some jobs that you just were overqualified for, but you felt that you were underqualified for?
Yeah, I'm not even sure overqualified is the right term. I can remember in my early 20s when I dropped out of college. Basically, I was a competitive bodybuilder in my late teens, and I was fortunate enough to compete nationally a couple of times and did well. And I thought that's the direction I wanted to go. And then I said, nah, I got back into school, and then I dropped out of school. And in my early 20s, I did bounce around from different types, landscaping, working in a car wash, which I started doing, summers in school. I worked a variety of jobs. I was really fortunate enough, again, 21, 22 years old, to find a company local one, entry-level position. I talk about this mentor in my book, where I dedicate a whole chapter on mentors. And this particular mentor was very significant, um, Paul Leary Sr., who hired me to work in this collection agency back in 1986. Sounds like a long time ago, but so in that, I've only really worked in two industries. This was my entry level opportunity in the first of two industries I worked in. The next one came 10 years later. So I was fortunate enough to have an incredibly influential, pivotal mentor that, everybody couldn't work for this guy, but it was the kind of person I thrived working for, working under, and was able to quickly move up. I was going to say probably quicker than I should have based on my experience and skill sets, but under his guidance, I was able to move up into leadership and training type positions where, and then through about 10 years that industry, I got up to, sort of branch level management positions in that company. So he sold and left, and I worked for the larger parent company in a couple of different offices. But the point is, in that company, I had a couple of very key mentors, and that helped me tremendously for that leg of my career and subsequent one too. Like I said, I really only worked in two industries in my life.
Lucky.
Doesn't mean I only had two jobs, but
no, I get it. No, I've covered the whole gambit. I think that's interesting when you talk about mentors. Mentors come to you kind of in a very organic and great way, and you have to be really open-minded to it, and you have to let it just kind of happen, right? So a lot of people try to force that mentor. They're out searching and say, I need to find a mentor, and then need to find a mentor. It's got to be that mutual fit. I had somewhat of a similar experience. I actually, I think it was 1996. I got an opportunity. A friend of mine's dad had a friend that was doing a startup with the time it was Bell Atlantic 9X. It just came out of 9X to Bell Atlantic 9X selling cell phones. Those were just coming out of bag phones and brick phones. The first cell phone, the first flip phone, the StarTAC, whatever it was. The letter S was also the number 5. You could store 99 phone numbers without names. I mean, this is going back a ways. And I got paid about, I think, $8 commission to sell a phone, and it was all outbound. It was I remember the founder, my first day, brings over a phone book, and he drops it on my desk, and he says, you can start at the front and work your way back, or start at the back, work your way front, whatever motivates you more to get people to buy phones, have at it. And, I was working hard, and very rarely did the phone ring. But on one day, a hot August day, we were closing at 3. This guy calls up, never met him before in my life. And he says, I need a cell phone. And I said, I need to sell you one. And he says, I'll be in. What time are you there till? I said, 3 o'clock. And 3:15 rolls around, 3:20 rolls around. I'm still at the store. I'm supposed to go down the Cape, spend some time with my friends. And 3:35, he calls. He says, I'm still coming. I'm about 10 minutes away. So at 3:45, guy shows up. I sell him the cell phone. Sit with him for about 30 minutes. He could tell that I wanted to get going because I was a young guy wanting to go hit the beach. And he looks at me and says, hey, let me ask you something. How much money did you just make? I go, honestly, about $8. And he said, why did you do it? I said, well, because you said you were coming. And he said, well, but why for $8? And I said, well, I figure if I take good care of you, you're going to find some other people that I can take good care of. And you're going to make my sales job a whole lot easier because I hate this phone book right here. I don't like calling from the phone book. I like people like you selling phones. And he says, you want a job? I said, I got one. He says, no, you want one that could pay a lot more than $8? And I said, well, yeah, sure, of course. And never met this guy. He was like in his 50s. And I'm 22, I think it was 22, 23. And he says, I want you to drive to Saratoga on Monday for a job interview. And I did. I drove out to Saratoga, sat with one of the most intimidating guys I've ever met, Bill Foster, who's a vice president of Noresco, big, huge, billion-dollar business now. Interviewed with him. I got the job. And the guy that bought the cell phone, his name's Bob Bogardus. He's 70, God's late 70s, and he's still full of piss and vinegar up in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. But that was my first mentor. And from the first day that I started with him, he taught me lessons that were meaningful and impactful that I was able to share with others through the world. I think right now, with people right now that are struggling and scrambling, I think it's more important for them to be so open to relationships, building and fostering them, like with you and I here, but to have an open mind and open eyes to people that can help, that's mutually beneficial. And a mutual beneficial and a mentorship is, Bob didn't do that for a financial gain. He did that for a personal gain, right? When people are giving as a mentor, they're gaining something personally. They're feeling better about themselves. Their legacy continues. Something in them gets to grow in someone else. And it doesn't need to be just one person, right? I think you said you had multiple mentors. How many mentors have you had, would you say, give or take, in your career and lifetime?
It's hard to actually pinpoint, Josh. In my book, I know I highlight, I think about 5 of them. And it could have been, there certainly was probably a couple of few more.
Mm-hmm.
I picked out 5 to honor,
Mm-hmm.
because I wouldn't be sitting here right now if it wasn't for people that had faith in me and had belief in me before I had it in myself. And that's really what I think all of these mentors, certainly a couple in particular, that gentleman, Paul Leary Sr., who I mentioned earlier on. The last mentor that I honor in my book is my brother, my older brother, who, we co-founded Triton together. He had a completely different background, did very, very well in high tech, also self-made individual, was able to work his way up into a company that went public, and then sort of had enough of the corporate rat race and the demands of a publicly held company, and saw what I was doing at that time in the inbound sales, direct response marketing business. I was living in Maine at the time, and he was going to start a company because with some other partners doing very similar to what I was doing in Maine, and that's when he invited me to come join him back in 2001.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's really my second leg, which was my second leg in that industry started in 1996 on the phones, actually, in Portland, Maine. But
yeah, what's interesting is the out of the book, the mutual respect in your relationship with your brother, because your book opens up with your brother giving his
forward.
He's giving the forward, and he's speaking pretty darn highly about you, right? And it's kind of interesting. You guys have this view. It's almost like you both mentor each other at some capacity. It's like it's really kind of it's a dynamic you definitely don't see in brothers very often. My 13-year-old and 2.5-year-old. I mean, that's a bigger. It's almost the same spread. 10 it's 10 years, 10.5 years. Yeah, so it'll be interesting to see how those two pan out in business together. Probably have some of the similarities that you and your brother have. Let's talk about the despair. Let's I talk about the despair in my talks. Your despair comes in the form of really death to start. You proposed in one of the coolest places on the planet, and at that time I think it had just opened in the Stratosphere in Las Vegas. You're at the top of the Stratosphere, right? The world's fastest elevator. Everything's going smooth as silk. You're happy as can be. Life's together. And then, boom, one day hits and everything changes.
Yeah, I was just part of my first startup. So I worked, again, I talk about being in 2 industries. In 96, I left the collection business and living in Portland, Maine at the time, was working part-time in a health club and really wasn't making ends meet. So I took a job. I answered an ad selling self-improvement products, inbound sales, full training. With commission, you could make $25 to $30 an hour. So it was very appealing because my current job, sort of my in-between job, wasn't really cutting it hourly pay. And instantly, I did very well on the inbound sales. Their training was good. Their incentives were good. Timing work that I was part of a Caribbean cruise contest that I subsequently ended up qualifying for, like in my first 6 months on the job. Life was great. I was a phone sales agent. I didn't have the management responsibility that I acquired in the collection business, which had its rewards and had its benefits, but I loved the having my own sales desk, if you will, without any additional responsibility. Than just performing basically like sales. What did you do for what were your sales today? Is really what counted. But that was good. And I met. I was my first marriage ended, and right around that time, I met a woman. I would describe her as a woman of my dreams, really. And she also worked in the company on the phones, and I actually helped train her. She had headphones and listened to me, and it was, I guess, as close to love at first sight as you'd find. Anyways, right around that time, two brothers and another partner left that vertically integrated full service direct response marketing company. I was in their call center, but they did everything from product development, obviously call center sales, customer service, fulfillment, media buying, everything, as I said, sort of under one roof. But some two brothers and a third partner left to start a service company doing call center work in the same industry, and invited me in to train their sales agents, be their sales manager, call center sales manager, basically. And that was at the end of 98, beginning of 1999. I think I started working with them in around January, February of 1999. And again, Jennifer and I were engaged, as you mentioned, Josh. We were engaged in the fall of '98 at the top of the stratosphere. I met my brother and sister-in-law out there. They knew about the whole thing, and I proposed to her at the top of the stratosphere hotel, which my book opens up right there. Anyways, April 25th of 1999, just a few months into the startup, I think we just had our first training class that I conducted in April. Jennifer went out to the movies. I was at home, and within an hour, the police were at the door. It was a classic shock. Why do I have police at the door? And they said, "Can we come in?" Invited them in, and they proceeded to tell me that she was, that she died in a car accident. She was driving a van on sort of a lonely road between Cumberland and Yarmouth, Maine. I lived with her in a condo in Yarmouth, Maine. Half the time, her daughters were with us. At the time, they were 6 and 8 years old. The closest thing I could compare to that was in our family, the oldest sibling, which was out, died hit by riding his bicycle when he was 13. I wasn't even born at the time, just to give you an idea. But that kind of thing reverberates through a family. Anyways, the only reference point I really had was my mom, who she spent a week with me after. My brother spent a week with me. My mom spent a week with me, and then I got back to work in the startup company. I threw myself back into work. You do what you can to pick up the pieces after a shocking situation like that. Literally the weekend that she died, she had picked out her wedding dress. This was April. We were supposed to get married that July of 1999. Fortunately, I had professional help, which I always encourage people should be, in the acute phase of anything that we call despair. I think the first thing should be is seeking help. And oftentimes it's professional help, whether that's your physician or counselor or mental health practitioner. That's always, I think, should be the first thing when you're crippled with despair or grief. I looked at grief support groups and other things that were all, nothing helped as much as time, Josh. Along the same lines, within a year of that time, my mom was diagnosed with lung cancer. She was my rock. She had survived the loss of a 13-year-old son. And, I remember saying to my mom, "Mom, how did you ever get over losing David?" And, she said very, very stoically, because she always was a very pragmatic person, you never get over it. You never get over a loss. You just learn to live with it. So time really was a big healer. But as time was going on, about a year after losing Jen, which isn't very much time, as I said, my mom was diagnosed with lung cancer, and she ended up passing away in 2000, 5 months after diagnosis. So that was a couple of big, close personal losses. And in between, not counting my pennies and already struggling a bit financially, Even though the startup presented great opportunity, it was still, a startup company and a startup wage. I had declared bankruptcy sort of in between those two losses. So it was a few, significant hits that I sort of define as a pretty tough stretch in my life.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing all of that in your words and your way. One of the things that I've always gone similar to your mom, because sometimes tragedies hit and people will say, oh, well, they've moved on, or they, move on or get on with it or whatever. And I've always kind of said, you don't move on, you move forward. When tragedy hits of some sort, you have to move forward. Staying in the stationary position or staying in yesterday, you'll never, in a lot of these cases, you look back and it's a lot easier said than done.
That's for
When
sure.
when it happens to you, you go, this shouldn't be happening to me, and all of the questions and whether, why is it, not fair or what have you. And then you go through all the stages, and then someone might say, you got to move on or you got to do something. And it's like, you don't have to move on. You have to figure out how to move forward. You're never going to move on. That stamp of your life, that piece. And I saw the emotion when I started to talk about it, that still hits you just like it's 1999 all over again. That's always going to be there, but there's a part of you that has inside of you that has to keep motoring along. And one of those pieces that I believe, that I know for me, and and you talk about it in your book and a number of occasions, but a chapter about getting vulnerable, the importance of being vulnerable, and in times checking your ego at the door, and realizing that you can't take care of all of it on your own. And for those listeners out there that are dealing with despair and difficulty right now, I hope one of the things that you take away from this, because I know a lot of people are fearful of getting help because they feel like something's wrong. I have been seeing a therapist for 13 years, and I'm sure I got something wrong, but he helps me as regular as I get to see to make things right. And just having that resource and that tool and that genius, that I can go to and call and say, hey, you know what? I just need an hour just to talk, just to go through some stuff that I'm dealing with. And some of it's trivial and nothing, and some of it's monumental and life-changing, but you really need to make yourself realize that you shouldn't have to take care of everything on your own. There are people out there. There's family, friends, mentors, and professionals. And I'm glad that you touched on that, because I think a lot of people, and you touch on it in your book, which is great. A lot of people, when they hear stories like yours, are like, oh, well, he's Superman. Where's his cape? Right? You did all this stuff. You got through all this stuff. But the reality, where there were a lot of little moving pieces in the background and the foreground and in front of you that were helping you along the way, your brother, your mother, your therapist, and they came in all different aspects of your and points and parts of your life. So I think that's pretty powerful stuff for people to make sure that when you get to that part in the book, take it to heart. We're not all invincible, right? So, and if you want somebody to call on, reach out to me. I got a good guy, and he's got a whole network of good people to reach out to. So we're 20 years ago. We still got 20 years to go. You go through all this loss. You claim bankruptcy, and most people don't have the courage to even with success. They typically don't have the courage to just roll it off the tongue like, yeah, you know what, I claim bankruptcy. Was that the hit? Was that like when you claim bankruptcy, your mom passes away, your fiance passes away? Was that your bottom? Do you think was that where you hit? Just didn't get any lower than that, or did it get worse?
Well, it's a good question, Josh. At the time of the bankruptcy, was within like 6 months of losing my fiance. It wasn't even it was a tough decision because of the abject failure, if you will, of saying, geez, I'm not going to, I'm going to flush my bills, which is, I went from being current to filing bankruptcy. I never had any delinquency or anything like that. I just was over my head with the amount of, expenses versus income I was making. So that's why I consulted a bankruptcy lawyer and did that. And it was a close call, meaning I could have not done it, but the stress of dealing with, collection accounts and delinquency and all that kind of stuff within months of losing my fiance. And at the time, my mother hadn't even gotten sick yet. That was, the bankruptcy was final in January of 2000, and my mom was diagnosed in March of 2000. So it was a financial struggle for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, before that. But so it paled in comparison to what I had experienced with a significant loss of,
Mm-hmm.
somebody, my fiance. And it was also minor in comparison of what I was about to deal with, which is my mom being sick and dying, who was, was somebody I was very, very close to and was a very significant, person in my life.
Mm-hmm.
So to answer your question, yeah, I think the combination of the three was a low for sure. At the time, it's just one of those things. I read books on loss, how to go on living when somebody you love dies, and why bad things happen to good people. I joined support groups. I did everything I could. As we both talked about, professional help where appropriate, and you know, time's an amazing healer. Really,
Mm-hmm.
I tried to do these other things, particularly in the loss of Jennifer, my fiance. I tried to do things to kind of, accelerate the healing process, which you really can't do.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so that sums up if that's my low of the low. I think in
Yeah.
retrospect, probably.
Yeah. Well, and I think that you hit, and I'll let people read on, what you were trying, and with expediting the process, and the importance of just kind of letting time tell you when things are right. They're your 168 hours every week, but you need to let time kind of work its way through with some certain things. Um, well, let's get to some good stuff. Let's get to your coming out of this. You went through all of this. You're in Maine. Your brother comes to you and says, "Hey, I'm going into business with you or without you, but I'd like for you to come on board with me. I got this company. I'm going to call it Triton Technologies. We're going to be in Massachusetts, so that's a hell of a commute for you. So you got to make some tough decisions." I was in business with my father for almost 7 years, and it doesn't matter how well you get along. And I know that you guys definitely had a better relationship probably than my dad and I, but there's definitely times when you're able to say, do, and be. I think my dad fired me. I think I've been fired 9 times in my life, and 8 of them were by my dad. But and there's definitely a different synergy when you're first generation, two brothers going into it. But going into this thing, how did you feel about it? Was the hesitancies? Were you excited? And then kind of walk us through, coming from Maine to Massachusetts to make this big leap.
Yeah, Maine after 7 years was home. I had the opportunity working in that first startup there was beginning to go well. We moved space from 50 seats to 100 seats, and obviously more square footage. So after 2.5, 3 years in that startup, things were going really, really well. We grew from the original 3 and me, which was 4 of us, to a couple hundred people in at the time Auburn, Maine. We started in Lewiston, Maine. And again, I had to make the tough decision to move back to Massachusetts. And myself, my brother, and some early partners that they had other business at the time, but they gave us the actual call center space and helped us, helped us funding wise and space wise in fitting out the call center in the beginning. Ultimately, they didn't stay on long as partners because they had their own, business different from what we were doing. And Triton wasn't all that attractive actually for the first few years, and for two partners. And we interchanged a number of partners over the years, especially the first several years, because again, not unlike a lot of startups, we struggled. We really struggled mightily for the first few years. And one thing that was very, very important to my brother and I and our third partner, Andy Bank, was we always wanted to make sure we had enough for the last payroll. Unfortunately, we had a number of those discussions over the first few years that we can have enough to make the last payroll, making sure that we had enough to make the last payroll. We were never going to not do that. So we hopped from lily pad to lily pad for our first 3 years or so in business, 2001 through 2004. And then 2005, things began to really turn up. We developed a great reputation for technology and servicing our clients, and we were very much the performance machine in terms of call center performance on our clients' calls. Again, this was a call center that our clients were marketers that advertised nationally on, at the time, TV and radio and print. The internet was just starting to really come on in the, mid 2000s, 3, 4, 5.
So if I was buying a sham wow, or if I was buying anything on TV that said call now, order now, and buy one get two free, those things, they were calling into your people, and you were delivering the professional sales.
Right.
Yeah.
Or somebody like us, Josh.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
we were a boutique, at the time 50 seats, and we grew to 100 plus seats too. But so we were known for not being able to handle a ton of volume, but what volume we handled, we were able to convert very well because we hired professional sales agents, and we converted it at the best possible average sale. So you used, chamois. So we sold everything from consumer hard goods to, exercise equipment, nutraceuticals, anything that you'd see, call now 1-800, could be a potential client. We were known for, again, sort of higher conversion rates, higher average unit sale. And that's how we sort of made a name for ourselves. Our biggest limitation was capacity, being because everybody wanted to give us more of their calls, more of their business because we performed so well. And, technology over time allowed us and our clients to be able to answer that, ability with cloud routing and things like that came along some years later. But we were fortunate enough to have great people that we either hired or developed that became, trainers. At first, I did all the hiring and the training for the first couple of few years in business. I did all of that, as well as managing the sales floor and client service. In time, a combination of hired and developed some excellent people, some of which are still with the company to this day. Others have gone on to do other really good things. But so 2004, things began to turn. 1, 2, and 3 were really tough. We started at the end of 2001. So 2 and 3, 4, 5, 6 were very good. 7 was very good. And, at that time, my brothers, my sister-in-law had a health condition that became very serious, and she had surgery that didn't go well. My brother was in between caring for his wife and also, his role as the CEO of the company. So long story short, we met a broker that ended up, convincing us that, hey, you never know when things are going to take a turn. You guys have had 3 very good years. He had experience with selling call centers and marketing call centers and he sold his own actually. And so long story short, 2007, we, interviewed suitors for the company. It seemed like the right thing to do. And in the fall of 2017, 6 years in business, we were bought by a private equity company.
Perfect timing. 2007, right? 2007. Yeah.
Which we didn't have a crystal. We didn't at the end of 2 years. We didn't have a crystal ball to see what was coming. We anticipated we were on a very excellent trajectory. Obviously.
Yep. Well, I got to tell you, I think the reason that you guys were so successful and were able to have interest in it is looking at your philosophies in your book and looking at the importance of customer service, looking at the responsibility. When you talked about the talent, you were doing things that were, you were finding out you were essentially a mentor to every applicant that came in, because you were actually trying to see what their inner talent was that they may not have seen, like doing things like requiring a second interview, even if they didn't need one, to make sure that they were timely. If you were timely and if you had some of those traits, you could train all the rest of the stuff, right? You can train them how to understand when someone calls in, what their pain points are, and be able to overcome those and show them the solution that you can provide and give them the sham wow or whatever it is. I'm going to just put a couple of lines out here to talk about it, and then I want to talk about why I know this is true in you and why the success comes in. You talk about where we're out of touch with the world, and the first is technology is speeding things up. We all expect everything, but He said, these days, it seems we're all out of touch with our fellow world travelers, and consequently, we're out of practice in dealing with them. And I think that your call center, you made sure that you and your team were always in touch with your customer, both the provider of whatever the good and service was, as well as the people calling in. It doesn't cost you anything to be nice. Don't wait for a good mood to smile. Smile and allow the good mood to follow. You follow that up with talking about the importance of having a mirror on your by your phone. I have been saying this for years, most of my career, and I sell software in my day job to public sector. We were a startup. I was one of the first employees, and now we're over 100 plus $1 million a year ARR. And I work mostly with public sector employees. And they get beat up all the time, right? Town halls, schools, they get, I mean, look on social media right now, everybody worrying about the reopening of schools, people picking up the phone, and people are getting hammered, yelling at them. I always say, put a mirror in front of your phone. And they go, what? And I said, it's not anything vain, but look at that mirror when somebody calls, because what you see is what they hear. And it's important for you to know that, because I got to tell you, think about this. Think about how Zoom has transformed how we communicate. I'm sure you're doing lots of it, but you're smiling more now because you can see yourself and you can see me. So I know what's going on, right? Whereas if I was just picking up the phone, you'd be like, oh yeah, let me look outside. Let me look at my phone. Let me see what's going on. That's that more personal touch, right? So we got this mirror right here. I can see me. If I'm looking like a jerk right now, I got to fix that quick. Otherwise, this ain't the Be Awesome podcast. This is the Are You Awesome podcast. And I don't want to do that. So, you put a lot of values and virtues and character and integrity into a very difficult job. While it's inbound sales calls, it was a difficult job, right? It wasn't in the sales world. If people are just calling you, that's we call that Skittles from the sky. That's like the easiest thing. That's better than going to door to door. But what you guys were doing was far from easy, and definitely not one of those cakewalks, right? So having all these values instilled in your team is what made you guys successful.
Yes, I had great leaders in the business when I was working my way up on the phones the first few years, and in the first startup, those partners and my boss were savvy business people and talented in the industry that we were in. And then, of course, partnering with my brother, who, he had excellent business acumen, an operational genius, really, and really an incredible problem solver. So, one common theme that we had within Triton was, as you touched on, Josh, at least touched on, if not, really drove home, was the importance of operating with integrity with our clients. So we refer to our customers as our clients, and we acquire them their customers. So we were pioneers in bringing in compliance as a small boutique company. I sort of champion that compliance, meaning listening to the sales agents' calls to make sure, it's one thing to make sure that we're very good at selling, but how about make sure that we're selling with integrity, which is really critical. And that ended up developing over the years at Triton to at least a four-person. I've been out of there for a number of years, but we had ended up bringing in our own in-house counsel that had, at least a few compliance people that would listen to calls constantly. So, and as I really, mention a lot in my book, in terms of treating others well, responsiveness, talking about on the client service side, treating people well, which includes, respect, reciprocation, and responsiveness, can really be an incredible differentiator in the marketplace, I think. Listen, performance is key. Nobody's gonna be interested in you unless you can deliver and perform. But sort of as deposits in the bank of faith and deposits in the bank of trust, that's really where respect and reciprocation and responsiveness. If a client sends you a note that they have an issue with performance or with call handling or service levels, getting back to them real time or immediately, it was that kind of business. Our clients were spending real dollars on generating calls that our people were handling, and they wanted to know what the performance was or the return was on those media dollars. That was really the biggest challenge that we had. performance-wise. So we didn't always do, even though we were known as a performance company, we didn't always perform well. Maybe we didn't handle enough calls and we dropped some, known as abandoning calls. The point is how responsive were we, and how were we at solving the issues? So I think, those are all critical pieces as well, Josh. And having great people in place, which we did at Triton, and I still do to this day. Having great people in place is essential, really.
Well, I'm going to share a story with you. You didn't hear the story. We didn't talk about it, so it's going to probably be a surprise. But like your mom was important to you, and was your rock. My mom is very similar. My mom was, she moved here on May 13th, 1966 from Madeira, first graduating high school class of Brockton High, the new high school, and didn't go to college. And so she didn't have formal education. She didn't have a profession for a very long time. And one thing that my grandparents had always taught me, and I love the word resilience, is always to be resilient. There's always a way through. And so in times in our lives, my mom had to dig in and do things that most otherwise might not do to get the job done. One story, which is funny, she and I talked about it yesterday when I was telling her I was going to do this podcast, was in the early 90s when she had to get back out in the workforce. And back then there was no Monster.com or LinkedIn. You went in the Herald and the Globe, you went to the Help Wanted section, and there was a sales job. And the sales job was to sell waste management trash containers. And so she applied, and she was so excited. And I'm sitting here like, I can't believe you're excited to go sell, dumpsters. And she says, "Are you kidding me? I get to go into these businesses and walk in and go, hey, you want to talk trash?" And this is in like 91, 92. That was her elevator pitch. Hey, you want to talk trash? I'm gonna fast forward to 2005. My mom finally found her niche. She was helping students learn English as a second language. She had an opportunity to become a Spanish teacher. But she had to go get certified. She had to go to college. She had to finish college. She had to do all these things. So she was going to school all day long. She's going to Bentley, going to school, studying, doing all that stuff. And from 2005 to 2007, I asked you about the little giant ladder last week when I sent you that random message, and you're probably like, what the hell did he ask me that for? Because from 2005 to 2007, my mom would set her alarm clock at 1 a.m., drive down the street to Triton Technologies and go into work and sell the hell out of little giant ladders. And a gentleman by the name of Mike McGuire, who worked under you at some capacity, every single shift that my mom left, because it was early in the morning, he would go to the door and make sure that she safely got to her car. And she said that he was a man of integrity, someone of class, and someone that respected and appreciated the work that others did on the phone every day. And that comes from leadership at the top, works its way down, and makes sure that it all comes into play. Without that opportunity for my mother, she would have never finished school. She would have never been certified. She wouldn't be a Spanish teacher today at Blue Hills Regional Voc Tech doing what she did. So the opportunities that you provided, not just the opportunities, but the opportunities to give happiness and the willingness to let them work. Saturday, she said, was a zoo in there. Everybody would go in because that's when all the calls were coming in. That's when the money was made. But she said, I'd go in at 1 o'clock. There was very few women on the phone. There were very few people on the phone because they didn't want to get up and work those hours. She said she loved it. She went in there. I got my little giant ladder right at the house still to this day. She got one at an employee discount. But that was a real life experience for me that I had no idea when I first got introduced to Limo J, who you were, where you worked, and what you did. And as I started scraping, I'm like, wow, this is pretty interesting. So I started looking at the stories and started listening to the things. And every single story that my mom and I talked about in the last week was positive. A positive work experience, and you don't have that very often. And so, first of all, thank you for providing that work environment and that instilling that in your employees. And secondly, you are the real deal. If anybody gets anything out of this podcast, that's a real life story. That's my mother. Buy the book. It's legit. Everything that he says is true. It's doing the right thing, smiling, caring, giving a damn. Whether it gets you the volume you need or not, always doing the right thing will pay off, and this guy's proof positive of it. So I just wanted to share that little story with you as that didn't make the book, obviously, because we just talked about it now, but maybe version 2.
That's a great story, Josh. It's to hear the story that your mom worked there. She worked the overnights, obviously, and she worked for Mike McGuire, who, Mike was a guy that worked for us. Gosh, he could have worked for us 7, 8, 9 years. Mike, I can remember. He is one of dozens of just excellently dedicated people. He worked his way up to both a trainer and a team manager, where I think he was your mom's shift manager there on the overnight. And he's in. Your mom is one of hundreds of people that work there that are just made the company. We weren't perfect by any means. Like, nothing is perfect, but we certainly did our best to recruit, hire, train, and retain good people like Mike, good people like your mom. It was the job on the phones was at times it was a tough job. It was conversion rates and average unit sale and different. But the point is that at times it was a transition job for people, because they didn't necessarily say, geez, I want to be a call center agent. That's my dream. So it was transitional. We did the best we could to recruit and retain good people like Mike and like your mom as examples. So thank you very much for sort of wrapping up with that story. Appreciate it.
Yeah, well, that's a one of the things too is you guys have so many products. You choose who you do business with, in that. Like when I talked about the Little Giant Ladder, you talked about the family and how great they were. I think they're in Utah. You just didn't push any widget out there just to push on people. I think that's important. There's a lot of people that are in sales that listen to my podcast, and I tell them how important it is to believe in what it is that you sell, because it really becomes easy. It's not really work. It's really prescribing what people need and understanding where their pains are. Before we go, a couple last things. Where do you get your coffee?
At Dunkin' Donuts on 30 Commercial Street in Foxborough. It's the I talk about them in my book. I don't know if that's why you're asking, but
yeah, well, you didn't say. I didn't see you say which one they were, but you talked about Rocco, so I wanted to make sure
Rocco's the guy that cuts my hair. Actually,
yeah.
that's but Frank, I'm not sure how you pronounce his last name. Baronis. Just to give you an idea, this guy owns a bunch. I don't even know how many Dunkin' Donuts in the area, but the product he puts out is the product he puts out, which is obviously coffee and food that goes with coffee. But the point is that his talk about recruiting and retaining. It's just terrific people. His daughter, who's a dentist, actually, it's this kind of place. If they're short-handed, she's a licensed practicing dentist. She works there in her father's franchise, and she's a kid in her late 20s, early 30s that works there. It's that kind of place, and everybody to their management, to everybody they hire, just treats everybody like gold and makes sure they get your coffee right. And, so that's why under the chapter of treating others well, that was a great example. And that's an awesome example, Josh, of differentiating yourself in kind of a commodity business, which is selling coffee and donuts and breakfast sandwiches. Treating people well is the difference between, that's why I go there once or twice a day for probably 5 years now, maybe longer.
Yeah, that's way out of the way, because you got, I know where that Dunkin' Donuts is in comparison to where you live, and being in Massachusetts, home of Honeydew and Dunkin' Donuts brands, you go probably 10 to get,
at least
to
a
get
few.
there, and the new Starbucks right down the street from me. So I know all about coffee. I know every coffee spot this side of the Mississippi. I actually had to get a endoscopy January 2nd. That's how I kicked off 2020. I was like, 2020 is terrible for me. I had a sick dog. My son broke his leg, and I had to get an endoscopy to get told not to drink so much coffee. I was drinking on average about 17 cups of coffee a day. I had no idea. I love coffee. And it doesn't do anything for me, because now I'm down to like a cup a day. I'm drinking this thing, and that's it for the day. I saved it for this podcast. But no, Rocco, you talked about the coffee, and I wanted to make a point of that to let people know who that was for the world, because you're absolutely right. There are a lot of companies out there that do exactly the same thing, that provide exactly the same product, and there's a reason why one's more successful than others, and that's the people, that's the service, that's what they provide. It's the care and the concern that they have for their client, and they know the importance of them, and they thank them and know where that money's coming from. The owner, and the owner's daughter, and all that. they appreciate you paying their mortgage, and that's why they're in front of you every day. My dad and I owned a spring water delivery business, and he made me drive the water truck every day and deliver every bottle of water. And I said, we can afford to hire drivers, Dad. I'm driving, delivering 300, 400, 5-gallon bottles a day. He said, nope. When the clients stop seeing us, that's when they stop paying us. We need to show them how important they are to us and provide them with the unparalleled service that they wouldn't get anywhere else. And that was something that's been instilled in me for forever. So Dunkin' Donuts, there you go. Commercial Street in Foxborough.
Not just any Dunkin' Donuts.
Yeah, not just any Dunkin' Donuts. The Dunkin' Donuts to go to. I'm going to make
Commercial Street in Foxborough.
You and I will have to grab a coffee when the
socially
distanced nonsense stuff is over. So you got out of Triton. You sold out to in 2007. You stayed on to somewhere around 2013. Then you retired. You are out of retirement. And I think that a lot of the stuff that you're doing is truly for, I don't want to use, maybe it's philanthropic, but their purposes outside of monetary gain. Monetary gain is nice. Hopefully you make a bunch of money on the book. Hopefully you make some money on the coaching, but you're really doing this to try to make a difference and help people's lives.
I like helping people. I want to help people. Yeah.
So talk about your coaching, talk about all the ways that people can get a hold of you. I'm going to put all this stuff on the show notes, but what do you specialize? It's resilience coaching, but there's a couple of different categories of things that you can provide on your page. Where do they go to find it? And your 30-second to however long you want elevator pitch.
Yeah, I work with people on a selective basis, both individuals and teams. Oftentimes it's, on my website, there's a page on speaking, and it gives the topics. I have a handful of topics that I really enjoy speaking on. And I like to talk about the turnaround, whether it's, a company might have had a bad quarter, or a team had a bad month or a bad quarter, or somebody had a bad year, individual. I like to work with people on their turnaround. So I like to consider myself, based on my experience, both good and bad, as a turnaround expert. So again, teams, individuals on their turnaround, and helping them not only bounce back, but bounce back higher than oftentimes than before. I can be reached at my name, ericchasen.com, and there's a link to my book, its own site, which is D2M.com, which is short for, from D2M.com. So it's Eric Chasen, or from despair to millionaire.com. I'm also active on LinkedIn under my name, and Facebook as well. Those are really the only social media sites that I'm active on. In particular, LinkedIn, but secondarily, Facebook. And I enjoy working with individuals and teams.
Releasing the book is August 25th, right? Is that the
yeah? Right now, it's available for pre-order, and it is actually publishing on August 25th, which is a Tuesday, 2 weeks from yesterday.
Awesome, and you can get it Kindle version, or you can get paperback. And if you like me, I still like the smell of paper, and I still love to Post-it note the heck out of things. You say right out of the gate in this, read it once and then read it a second time and take your time. And really kind of dig into all of the examples, ideas, and practices, and I think I could read it 3 or 4 times. It's 150 odd pages, easy read. Like I say, lots of nuggets of knowledge. So thanks for putting it together. You didn't need to do it, right? You didn't need to. You could have just stuck around, done what you were doing. I don't know if you play golf, but play golf. That's what most retired people do. That's why you probably that's probably why you came out of retirement, because you don't play golf.
I don't have very many interests.
If you play golf, you would probably stay retired. That's what I hear anyway. Go down to Florida or something. But no, I appreciate you doing this. I think that there's so much. There's so many people that have had success in their lives that still have a lot left to give, and some of them don't do it. They just kind of go off and ride off into the sunset. So appreciate you doing all that to keep the book going, because when you're gone, the library's closed, as I've always been told. So keep up the good work, my friend. It's been
Thank you very much, Josh.
Pleasure to meet you. I'm so appreciative that Limo J thought to put us together, and we'll have to do a follow-up after the release and see how everything's going. And if there's anything Be Awesome can do to help you in the future, you now got a friend in us. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much to you and to our mutual friend Jay.
Yes, thank you. And that will do it for another episode. This was a long one because, like I said, I'm gonna call this cut from the same cloth. I think I could talk for days about sales strategy and
Hope
life.
everybody's still awake, Josh.
Yeah, life as we know it. No, these guys. Well, some people they put my podcast on to put them to sleep on purpose. But they they're open to tell me about it. They say my voice has got a soothing sound. Not quite Matthew McConaughey, but a close second or second hundred. No, this was a great podcast. I was really glad that such an incredible. If there's a takeaway here, that whole 7 lines of separation and how close it is. I've never met Eric in my life. I've never talked to him. I didn't even know he existed. And then when I just scraped the surface to find so many different direct ties and direct pieces, as well as how he and his brother's company actually positively impacted my family's life.
Very cool story.
Without anybody actually knowing, is a pretty strong takeaway. So that will do it for us here. I, as always, am encouraging and appreciative of anybody that goes on to iTunes podcast and does a rating and review for us. As I share with you, there's 1.1 million podcast channels in the world today. That is a very busy place. Less than 100,000 of them have 10 or more likes and comments, and because of you, I've got 55, and I'm slowly growing. But as I grow with those ratings and reviews, that's what gets me more visibility, so that we can share more of these stories with more of the world. So, as always, you do that, you get a free Be Awesome T-shirt for your efforts. So just send me an email, Josh@beawesome, BEAUSM.com, and we will get that in the mail. And you can find me on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, BE_AU_SM. And that will do it for us here today. And if there are any local Easton residents, businesses, or people that want to talk about the awesome that they're doing, give me a call. I'm ready to have you on anytime you're ready. If you can be anything, be awesome.